comment on some experience I've had. It's really a point for Aled, about some experience I had which matches a lot of what Aled said about working on advising government, although I haven't done so much and not in the same areas. And the reason I'm saying this is partly so Aled can say, no, it's not like that, if I got it wrong, and partly because it might be useful advice to others. And I'd like to mention two things. One is, you kind of think, I mean, the areas I've worked on is health consequences of pollution and also advising the Cabinet Office on communicating. So when I first did this, my assumption was that the lead government department on this would be where the integration happened. They knew what was going on. You put up this slide of all the complicated bodies, EU bodies, government bodies, and everything that were involved in this. And I was thinking, I saw similar things. I was inclined to think, that's it. They've got everything covered. But in fact, they didn't. There were gaps. There was kind of double counting, where there were different groups who were working on the same thing and not talking to one another. There was lack of internal communication. And to assume that the integration of all this happened in the government department that was responsible for doing that was a mistake. It did, but it didn't integrate everything that was going on. There were silos, there was overlap. Was this just me? And the other point I'd make was, I said I had something with helping policymakers communicate. And I'm a statistician. I'm Kevin McConway, people don't know me. So I'm a statistician, and I have to know a lot about uncertainty and about communicating uncertainty. And one of the things with that was trying to help them to communicate the uncertainty in what they have to communicate to others. Now, a lot of the things I was telling them about were reports that had been produced for government, that had been done in government. But I guess this is because I was older than most of them. I knew about this stuff. They were in the institutions who were reported to, and they didn't know about it. I'd had to learn about it for other reasons. The other snag of doing that is, if you're advising politicians and policymakers on how to communicate, you have to bear in mind that they will communicate what they want to communicate. And you can advise them, this is what the data is saying, this is what the modelling is saying. If they don't want to put that across, they won't put that across. What is just me being bad at it?
Good question. I mean, just quickly to respond on that first one, I think it's worse than that. Because the one thing you didn't say is actually the competition between the departments. So they're siloed and they're competitive. And actually in the Commission, they were very clear, the models that DG Energy use are different to the models that DG Climate use, are different to the models that DG Finance use, and they don't trust each other's models. Even though, and actually in the Commission it's a bit different to the UK government, because the Commission, you have experts that go into a commission, they specialise in energy and they stay there and they become really expert at it. We have the sort of the civil service in the UK is much more about being a really good civil servant, not a really good energy mathematician or climate policy. So people move between. So there's a little bit more movement between departments in the UK. As the Commission, they become very expert and they become very wedded to their particular way of doing it. So there's a lot of competition and they just don't trust each other, and integration doesn't happen anywhere. And in particular, in the UK, I don't know if anyone's from the Treasury here, DEC and DEFRA and all these bits of government that do policy development. Treasury does its own thing, has its own modelers, does maths in a very different way to everyone else, and doesn't listen to any other department. So there's a lot of trying to lobby and trying to do some of that internal lobbying between departments to get Treasury to do it. But at the end of the day, it's where we try and influence is within the Treasury, because that's where power is held and that's where models are ultimately used. So that integration happens in the Treasury, but they kind of integrate by ignoring what everyone else has told them and do their own thing. But just quickly on the uncertainty, I think that's really important. Actually, the actuaries, that's where they really are keen on understanding what you do with uncertainty and how you make decisions under uncertainty. And with Hannah and the predecessor in there, David Spiegelhalter, was brilliant at talking about uncertainty and how you communicate uncertainty to the public, to government. And so you need people like that who can really articulate, what do we mean by uncertainty? What are the metaphors you can use to understand it? Climate science, which I've now been doing for over 20 years, has been really bad at talking about uncertainty within models. People don't understand where the uncertainty comes from. So when you get climate models originally that started with uncertainty, I did astrophysics, our uncertainties were, the universe is somewhere between 0 billion years and 30 billion years. Huge uncertainty. The more knowledge we get, our uncertainty comes down. Climate science is almost the opposite. The more knowledge they get, the more stuff they put into their models, uncertainty gets bigger because it's more complicated. Yeah. But politicians don't understand why things get worse when you put more information into it. And it's because we're understanding the system more. And that really confuses them. So we've been really bad at communicating that. And I think that's something we need to be much better at doing, is to say, actually, sometimes when we understand things better, uncertainty sometimes gets worse. And that's been a real problem for climate in particular.
Any more questions? So we also encourage questions from students and early career. So,
yeah, thanks for all the speakers. Really interesting takes on stuff, particularly around AI and pushing quite hard for positive uses of AI and social good uses of AI. I guess my question for everybody working in these sort of quite high-level policy spaces, because we've also heard conversations about not losing touch with the public and speaking the language and tying into the things that they care about, and not getting confused with language. AI as a term is thrown around a lot, means lots of different things to lots of different people. So the question, is there a responsibility on us as communicators to try and draw quite sharp lines between AI use in things like research modeling that might have very positive social good coming out of it, and things like the mass adoption of large language models and the risks and dangers to society that those might make? So that's the question. Okay. Is there a responsibility to include that in our conversations?
I'll pick up on that. So, and what you say is a really good question. And it goes essentially back to Hannah's point that you need to be aware of what the audience, where the audience is coming from. So frequently when I talk to people and they say we're using AI, it really means they're just using a computer. And they're using some sort of computer technique. And if you kind of understand that, then it's relatively easy to answer their question, because they might be using quite a simple computer technique which you can advise them on. So that's the first question you should always ask, is what you mean by AI, computer-aided design or something like that. If it's deeper and it's large language models, yeah, then you can talk about how they work and the sort of way that they make their decisions, which comes back to my business of explaining the various bits of that. My own area is what I would call scientific machine learning, which is much more precise, and that's where we can apply it to climate models, for example, or weather forecasting or design of aeroplanes. And then you're on a different thing again. So yes, you define your terms, but majority of the press reports on AI, they really do just mean I'm using a computer, or even I'm just using a spreadsheet. So you have to know your audience and be aware of what they're asking. I don't think it's good to draw harsh lines, by the way, because it's such a big subject. I mean, and it all moves around. So, it's best to kind of look at it as a whole thing.
Can I follow up slightly? I think.
So, just in the essence of time, sorry.
We can talk about coffee.
Yes.
Yes, my question is for David. I'm an early career researcher, and I find the idea of knowledge exchange very appealing. Also, talking in high schools is very appealing, both of them. But I'm struggling to find where to begin.
Okay.
So people don't approach me because I'm just starting, and then I want to see, okay, how can I use the time that I have, the free time outside of research, to do something, to apply that research.
So, yeah, it was a difficult question to answer in the past. It's much easier now because part of the Academy, the KE Hub, they're organising specific early career training programs, and also they offer easy access routes. So I think what you should do is talk to people here who can give you mailing lists to join and find out and look on the programs of what's going on with the KE Hub and the Academy, but also the Newton Institute has for a long time done training for youngsters, modelling camps, etc., and ICMS. So talk to other people and also investigate what's available in your department. I think other people will know stuff. So ask around. We are trying to make it easier for you because by actually bombarding departments with emails through HODMs and stuff to send out. So you should be getting emails. If you don't, then there's something wrong in your department. But talk to people and be pushy. If you want to do that, there's a million people like Chris who's, you know, would be only too happy to recruit you.
May I ask which university you're at?
Here at Cambridge.
Oh, well, there's lots of people here.
So Julia,
Great. Yeah, question at the back.
This was building on Chris's statement earlier. There's a communication question based on these sort of numbers that we use as mathematicians. So you mentioned that we have medical techniques that are 95% accurate in diagnostics using technology, which is better than doctors. But we know that numbers can hide other numbers. So a number like 95% might hide deeper issues of how false positives and false negatives come up. In some instances, you worry a lot more about false positives, like in plagiarism testing, and false negatives are a problem in medical diagnostics. Secondly, that 95% can hide performance on different demographics. It might be 96% actually on some demographic, and then 22% on some other demographic. And then what happens if later down the line, after sort of a test that as mathematicians said this is 95% accurate, so it's better than doctors, and then later it sort of found out that actually it's behaving or acting really badly on some demographic, you end up with some sort of front page Guardian news article saying this algorithm that was tested by these mathematicians now has an increased death rate, mortality rate in blah in some minority demographic. And then we have instances where politicians can throw us under a bus, like in the A-levels exam grading fiasco, where Ofcom was thrown under a bus because the politicians weren't happy with the outcome. How do we communicate the numbers behind the numbers? How do we deal with this sort of multi-leveled, like 95% is a lovely number, but it's hiding so many other numbers which can manifest and become many more problems later on for us and for society?
I'll pick up on that for stop. I think it's a great question. So to reassure you, Maurice, that 95% went through a number of ethics committees. A lot of testing.
It was just an example.
No, but that's a very, very good example. And people, I mean, my colleague Kit Yates at Bath writes a lot about how you communicate these sort of uncertainty things and what do you mean, what does it mean by, say, 2 DNA results or 1 in a million. I mean, these are incredibly deep, important questions. And there are people out there who, I mean, David Spiegelhalter, for example, who are doing, I think, a good job, and others in this room. But it is one of the hardest things to communicate, and it's really difficult to get your head around. So, something we all have to do and try and do as well as we can.
Just to add to that, I think there's something Chris put in there. When you've got those sort of accuracy rates, the CV example, if you train it on CVs, you're going to get a racist answer in recruitment because of the way we've judged things in the past. And so you can get that kind of accuracy rate which hides a lot of things. So I think that all we can do is be honest and have that conversation with as many people who will listen. Unfortunately, not many people will listen. They want the headline and then they'll come around and complain about the answer later on. So if we can be honest and say, yes, okay, you took that number, but actually, here's what we meant by it. And that was there for you to see, and you talk to the people around them and try and get some people to understand. You can be as pushy as you possibly can so that people do listen. And there will be people that listen, but there will be people who just want the headline and just want it as an excuse to do what they want to do.
Great. Well, thanks very much to our speakers, so round of applause.